Waiter's security demanded an answer for why the cubs stood with the human. The cubs gave nothing. Part 1. The cargo bay smelled like rust and old oil. Daesung pulled another supply crate across the metal floor, his boots scraping against the deck. Station Kepler 442 was always cold. The heating systems never worked properly in the outer bays, and nobody seemed to care enough to fix them. He had been coming to this station for 3 years now, always the same routine. Load supplies, check inventory, move on to the next job. He was alone, which was how he preferred it. After leaving Earth's military 5 years ago, Daesung had learned to enjoy the silence. No commanders shouting orders, no teammates depending on him, just him, his small cargo ship, and the endless black between stations. The sound came from behind the waste recyclers, a soft whimper, almost too quiet to hear over the hum of machinery. Daesung stopped moving the crate and listened. There it was again, not a mechanical sound, something alive. He walked slowly toward the recyclers, his hand near the tool belt at his waist. Station Kepler 442 had rats sometimes, though calling them rats wasn't quite right. They were alien creatures about the size of cats with too many legs and sharp teeth. But this sound was different. This sound was scared. Behind the recyclers, pressed against the cold wall, were 3 small shapes. Daesung knelt down slowly, keeping his distance. His eyes adjusted to the shadows, and he saw them clearly. 3 cubs. Not human, not even close. They were covered in thick fur, dark brown and gray, with round ears and black noses. Their eyes were wide and yellow, reflecting the dim light of the bay. Daesung recognized them immediately. Kothar. He had seen adult Kothar before. Massive bear-like creatures who stood over 7 feet tall and were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. But he had never seen their young. These 3 were small, maybe the size of human toddlers huddled together and shaking. They watched him with those yellow eyes, not moving. The largest one, sitting in front of the other 2, had its ears flat against its head. A warning. The smallest one, barely visible behind the others, made that whimpering sound again. Daesung sat down on the cold floor, making himself smaller. He knew enough about animals to know that standing over scared creatures was a bad idea. He stayed quiet for a long moment, just sitting there, letting them see he wasn't a threat. The cubs didn't run. They didn't attack. They just watched. Daesung slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a ration bar. It wasn't much, just compressed protein and grains, but it was food. He broke off a piece and placed it on the floor between him and the cubs. Then he slid it forward just a little and pulled his hand back. The cubs stared at the food. The largest one sniffed the air. The middle one tilted its head. The smallest one stayed hidden. Daesung didn't move. He waited. After what felt like forever, the largest cub crept forward. Its movements were careful, cautious. It grabbed the piece of ration bar with small claws and pulled it back to the others. They sniffed it together, and then the largest one ate it quickly. The other 2 watched, their eyes moving from the food back to Daesung. He broke off 2 more pieces and slid them forward. This time, the middle cub came out to get them. It was braver than the first, moving faster, grabbing the food and rushing back. The smallest one finally peeked out from behind the others, eyes wide with hunger. Daesung left the rest of the ration bar on the floor and stood up slowly. The cubs tensed, ready to run. He took 3 steps back, then turned and walked away. He could feel their eyes on his back as he returned to his work. Over the next 3 days, Daesung came back to Bay 7 every few hours. Each time he brought food. Each time he sat down and placed it on the floor. Each time he left before they finished eating. He never tried to touch them. He never spoke loudly. He just gave them food and space. On the 2nd day, the cubs didn't hide when he arrived. They stayed where they were, watching him from beside the recyclers. The largest one, which Daesung had started thinking of as the guardian, sat up a little straighter. The middle one moved closer, just a few steps, curious. The smallest one stayed behind the others, but it wasn't hiding anymore. On the 3rd day, something changed. When Daesung sat down with food, the middle cub walked right up to him. It sat down just a few feet away and watched him with those intelligent yellow eyes. Daesung stayed very still. The cub reached out 1 small paw and touched the toe of his boot. Just a tap. Then it grabbed the food and walked back to the others. By the 4th day, Daesung had finished his cargo work. His ship was loaded and ready to leave. He should have departed that morning, But he came back to Bay 7 one more time. The cubs were waiting. They had moved out from behind the recyclers and were sitting in the open, watching the bay entrance as if they knew he would come. When he sat down, the smallest cub finally came forward. It was tiny compared to the others, with lighter fur and one ear that folded funny. It walked right up to Daesung and placed a small paw on his hand. The touch was gentle, warm through the fur. Daesung smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in weeks. That was when the bay doors opened and security came in. There were 8 of them, all wearing the dark uniforms of station security. They carried weapons, stun rifles held ready. At the front was Director Velshara, a tall Vralthak with gray skin and cold black eyes. She looked at Daesung, then at the cubs, and her expression showed disgust. "Step away from the juveniles," Velshara said. Her voice was sharp and hard. Daesung stood up slowly, his hands raised. "There's been a misunderstanding," he started to say. The cubs reacted immediately. All 3 of them moved between Daesung and the security team. The largest one, the Guardian, made a low growling sound deep in its chest. The middle one stood on its back legs, trying to look bigger. The smallest one pressed against Daesung's leg, still touching him. "You are under arrest for trafficking of alien juveniles," Velshara said. "This is a coalition capital offense." "I didn't traffic anyone," Daesung said, keeping his voice calm. "They were alone. I just gave them food." "You will be interrogated and tried according to coalition law," Velshara continued, ignoring his words. She gestured to her team. "Separate the juveniles from the human. Use sedation if necessary." 2 security officers moved forward. The cubs growled louder. The smallest one, still pressed against Daesung's leg, made a high-pitched alarm sound that echoed through the bay. "Wait," Daesung said, his hands still raised. "Please wait. You're scaring them." But the security team didn't wait. One officer reached for the Guardian cub. In a flash of movement, the cub lunged forward and bit the officer's gloved hand. The officer yelled and jerked back. The cub returned to its position in front of Daesung, teeth bared. Velshara's eyes narrowed. She raised her hand and the security team aimed their stun rifles at the cubs. "Stop!" Daesung shouted. He took a step forward, putting himself between the weapons and the cubs. The cubs moved with him, pressing closer. They formed a triangle around his legs, all 3 of them growling now, protecting him even though they were small and helpless against weapons. Velshara stared at the scene for a long moment. Then she lowered her hand. The security team lowered their weapons. "Seal the bay," she ordered. "No one enters. No one leaves." The security team backed out of Bay 7. The massive doors closed with a heavy sound that echoed through the space. Daesung looked down at the 3 cubs pressed against him, still growling at the closed doors. The standoff had begun. Security demanded an answer for why the cubs stood with the human. The cubs gave nothing. Part 2. The bay stayed sealed for 6 hours before anything happened. Daesung sat on the floor with his back against a cargo crate. The 3 cubs had finally stopped growling and settled down around him. The largest one lay across his feet. The middle one rested its head on his knee. The smallest one curled up against his side, breathing slowly in sleep. Daesung was tired, but he didn't sleep. He kept watching the bay doors, waiting. He knew this wasn't over. Director Velshara would come back with questions, with accusations, with demands. He had seen her type before in the military. People who believed they knew the truth before asking any questions. A speaker crackled to life somewhere above him. The voice that came through was Velshara's, cold and formal. Human-designated Daesung, you will answer the following questions. Failure to cooperate will result in additional charges. Daesung looked up at the security camera mounted near the ceiling. A small red light blinked steadily. They were watching everything. "I'm listening," he said. "Why did you approach the Cathar juveniles?" "They were alone and hungry. I gave them food." "What arrangement did you make with their guardian?" "There was no guardian. They were alone when I found them." "What is your purpose in detaining these juveniles?" "I'm not detaining them. They can leave whenever they want." "Who are you working for?" "Myself, I'm an independent cargo hauler." There was a pause. When Velshara spoke again, her voice had an edge of anger. "You expect me to believe you approached 3 Cathar juveniles out of simple kindness. Humans do not act without self-interest. You want something from them." Daesung felt the smallest cub stir against his side. He placed a hand gently on its back, keeping his voice calm. "Believe what you want. I'm telling you the truth. Your species has a documented history of deception. Your presence in Coalition space remains probationary due to your violent nature and lack of trustworthiness. This incident will be reported to Coalition Central Command. Humanity's status will be reviewed. The speaker clicked off. Daesung closed his eyes and let out a long breath. This was bigger than he thought. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about all of humanity. One simple act of feeding hungry cubs, and now the entire human race might pay for it. The middle cub lifted its head and looked at him. Its yellow eyes were bright and aware. Daesung wondered what it understood. Could it sense his worry? Did it know that helping them might have been a mistake? No, it wasn't a mistake. Looking at the cubs, remembering how scared and hungry they had been, Daesung knew he would do the same thing again. 2 hours later, the speaker came on again. This time, the voice was different. Mechanical and flat. A translator device. Juveniles of Cathar, you will respond to questioning. The cubs' ears perked up. All three of them lifted their heads, looking at the speaker. Why do you remain with the human? The guardian cub stared at the speaker but didn't make a sound. What did the human promise you? Silence. Are you afraid of the human? The smallest cub yawned and closed its eyes again. The middle one lay back down on Daesung's knee. Do you wish to leave the human's presence? The guardian cub stood up, walked in a small circle, and lay back down across Daesung's feet. Not one sound, not one gesture toward the speaker. Respond to questioning. This is a legal requirement under coalition law. More silence. The cubs acted as if the speaker didn't exist. They simply stayed where they were, close to Daesung, calm and quiet. The mechanical voice tried different questions. It asked about food. It asked about threats. It asked about family. It asked the same questions in different ways. The cubs gave nothing. They didn't growl. They didn't whimper. They didn't acknowledge that anyone was speaking at all. After 20 minutes, the speaker clicked off again. Daesung understood what the cubs were doing. They were protecting him in the only way they could. By saying nothing, they gave Velshara no evidence, no testimony, no proof of anything except that they chose to stay. That choice seemed to make everything worse. Days passed slowly in Bay 7. Daesung rationed the food he had left in his pack. He shared everything with the cubs, giving them most of it. They needed it more than he did. Water came from an emergency supply locker in the bay. It tasted like metal, but it kept them alive. The cubs stayed close. During the day, they explored the bay a little, always coming back to check on him. The guardian cub, which Daesung started calling Bomb in his mind, took its role seriously. It watched the doors constantly. The middle cub, Haru, was curious about everything, sniffing tools and crates. The smallest one, Nari, stayed nearest to Daesung, often touching him with a paw or pressing against his leg. At night, they slept in a pile. Daesung would lean against the cargo crate, and the cubs would arrange themselves around him. Warm bodies in the cold bay, soft breathing in the silence. It reminded him of his childhood before the military when his family had a dog. That feeling of being trusted by something innocent. On the 4th day, Bomb did something unexpected. The cub carefully used its claws to groom Daesung's hair, the way it groomed its siblings. Gentle movements removing dust and tangles. It was a gesture of pack bonding, Daesung realized. To Bomb, he was part of their group now. On the 5th day, Haru brought him a gift, a small piece of shiny metal, probably a broken bolt from somewhere in the bay. The cub placed it carefully next to his pack and looked at him, waiting. Daesung picked up the metal piece and examined it, then nodded seriously. Thank you, he said. Haru made a pleased, chirping sound. On the 6th day, Nari stayed pressed against him almost the entire time, as if sensing he was getting weaker. He was rationing food heavily now, and hunger was making him tired. The cub seemed worried, pushing its nose against his hand frequently, checking on him. The speaker came on again during the 7th day. This situation cannot continue indefinitely. The human will be removed by force if necessary. The juveniles will be taken into coalition protective custody. Bomb stood up and growled at the speaker. Haru and Nari moved closer to Daesung, pressing against him from both sides. The juveniles' refusal to cooperate is being interpreted as evidence of manipulation. The human has clearly compromised their judgment through unknown means. This supports trafficking charges. Daesung wanted to argue, to shout at them that they were wrong, but he was too tired, and he knew it wouldn't matter. They had already decided what they believed. Then something changed. The bay's communication system beeped with an incoming transmission. A new voice came through the speaker, deep and rumbling. It spoke in a language Daesung didn't understand, but the cubs reacted immediately. All three of them stood at attention, ears forward, eyes wide. The voice spoke for several minutes. Then it switched to Coalition Standard, heavily accented. "This is Elder Matriarch Kovara of the Kothar homeworld. I am en route to Station Kepler 442. No action will be taken regarding the juveniles or the human until my arrival. This situation falls under Kothar sovereignty. Any violation of this order will be considered an act of aggression against the Kothar people." The speaker clicked off. The bay was silent again. Daesung looked down at the three cubs. They looked back at him with those yellow eyes. Bomb's tail moved slightly, a small wag. Haru chirped softly. Nari pressed closer. Help was coming. But Daesung had no idea if that help was for him or against him. The Kothar were proud warriors. They might be angry that a human had touched their young. They might want punishment. All he could do was wait, and hope that whoever this elder matriarch was, she would understand. He hadn't hurt the cubs. He had just fed them. He had just sat with them. That was all. The cubs settled back down around him. Whatever was coming, they seemed calm. Maybe they understood something he didn't. Maybe they knew their people would see the truth, or maybe they were just too young to understand the danger they were all in. A security demanded an answer for why the cubs stood with the human. The cubs gave nothing. Part 3. The Kothar homeworld received the news within hours. 3 cubs found on a distant station. 3 cubs standing with a human. 3 cubs refusing to speak against him. The information traveled fast through official channels and even faster through unofficial ones. Within a day, every Kothar in the galaxy knew about it. On the homeworld, in the ancient council chambers carved from mountain stone, the elders gathered. There were 12 of them, each representing a different clan. They sat in a circle as their ancestors had done for thousands of years, and they argued. Elder Malketh spoke first. He was old, his fur gone silver with age, his voice rough like grinding rocks. "This is an insult. A human touching our young. Our cub standing with an outsider. We should demand immediate custody and punish this human for his interference." Elder Kovara listened quietly. She was the oldest among them, over 90 years old, though Kothar aged slower than humans. Scars crossed her face and arms from battles fought long ago. She had led her clan through wars, through famines, through the first contact with the Coalition. When she spoke, others listened. "The cubs are silent," she said. "Why?" "They are traumatized," Malketh replied. "Confused. The human has done something to their minds." "Kothar cubs cannot be manipulated," another elder said. "Their instincts are pure. If they feared the human, they would run. If they hated him, they would bite. They do neither. They stand with him," a third elder added. "Against armed security. Against authority. Against logic. This is unprecedented." Kovara stood up slowly. When she spoke, her voice filled the chamber. "I will go to this station. I will see the cubs. I will see this human. Then we will know the truth." No one argued with her. When Kovara made a decision, it was final. In another part of the galaxy, on Coalition Central Station, the human counselor Ji-hoon sat in his small office and read the reports about Daesung over and over. Each time he read them, he felt his stomach tighten with worry. Ji-hoon had fought for years to get humanity accepted into the Coalition. It had been a slow, painful process. Humanity was seen as violent, unpredictable, too emotional. They were given probationary status, which meant they were allowed in the Coalition, but watched constantly for any sign of trouble. And now this. A human accused of trafficking alien cubs. It didn't matter that the charges seemed false. It didn't matter that the cubs appeared healthy and willing to stay. All that mattered was the appearance. The other species would use this as proof that humans couldn't be trusted. His communication console beeped. An incoming call from Counselor Thexnar, a Vraltek-like Director Velshara. Ji-hoon accepted the call, and the holographic image of Thexnar appeared above his desk. The Vraltek looked pleased, which was never a good sign. "Counselor Ji-hoon," Thexnar said, his voice smooth and cold. "I assume you have seen the reports from Station Kepler 442. "I have." "This is exactly the kind of behavior we warned about when humanity applied for Coalition membership. Your species cannot control its impulses. You interfere where you are not wanted. You disrupt order." Ji-hoon kept his face neutral. The investigation is ongoing. No conclusions have been reached. The cubs refuse to speak. That is evidence of manipulation. Your human has done something to them. Or, Ji-hoon said carefully, the cubs are choosing not to speak because they feel safe with him. Thexnar laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Safe with a human? Your kind thinks it can solve everything with sentiment and emotion. This is why you remain on probation. This is why you always will. The call ended. Ji-hoon sat back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He needed to do something. He couldn't let one cargo hauler destroy everything humanity had worked for. He opened a secure channel and sent a message to Captain Yuna, commander of the human military outpost nearest to Station Kepler 442. Captain Yuna received the message while inspecting her tactical team. She read it twice, her jaw tightening. The message was simple. Extract Daesung quietly. Make the problem disappear. Protect humanity's reputation. She knew Daesung. They had served together for 8 years on Earth's defense forces. He had been her weapons specialist, quiet and reliable. He never lied. He never broke protocol without good reason. If he was in trouble, there was more to the story than the report showed. But orders were orders. If Coalition Central wanted him extracted, she had to at least try. She called her team together and started planning. It would be difficult. Station Kepler 442 was neutral territory, heavily guarded. Breaking into a sealed bay would require precise timing and would probably end her career. But if she could get Daesung out, maybe the incident would be forgotten. She looked at the faces of her team. Young soldiers, all human, all trained to protect their own. They looked back at her with determination. They would follow her orders even if it meant trouble. We move in 3 days, she said. Full stealth approach. In and out before station security knows we're there. Her second in command, a man named Gi Seok, raised his hand. Captain, permission to speak freely? Go ahead. Are we sure he's guilty? I've read the reports. It sounds like he just fed some hungry kids. Yuna was quiet for a moment. It doesn't matter if he's guilty. Politics doesn't care about truth. It cares about appearances. We get him out, we save humanity's reputation. That's the mission. But even as she said it, she felt wrong. This wasn't how things should work. The coalition was supposed to be about justice, about truth. But more and more it seemed to be about power and control. About making sure everyone stayed in their place. Back on Station Kepler 442, Director Velshara watched the security footage for the 100th time. The human and the cubs sleeping together in the cold bay. She watched the cubs groom him. She watched them play near him. She watched the smallest one press against him whenever he moved. It made her angry. She couldn't explain why. Maybe because it didn't fit her understanding of how things worked. Humans were dangerous. Cubs were innocent. Those two things shouldn't mix peacefully. Her assistant, a young Vreltek named Kelvan, stood beside her. Director, the Kothar Elder will arrive in 2 days. What are your orders? We maintain the seal. We document everything. When the Elder arrives, she will see that the human has manipulated these cubs. She will see that we were right to detain him. And if she doesn't see it that way, Velshara turned to look at him, her black eyes cold. She will. The truth is obvious. Humans cannot be trusted. This human has done something to these cubs. We just need to prove it. But watching the footage, even she had to admit something bothered her. The cubs looked happy, healthy, comfortable. They didn't act like prisoners or victims. They acted like they chose to be there. She pushed the thought away. It didn't matter what they looked like. What mattered was maintaining order. What mattered was keeping dangerous species like humans under control. What mattered was being right. The elder matriarch Kovara's ship approached Station Kepler 442 slowly. It was a massive vessel, designed for war but decorated with the honor marks of peace. On the bridge, Kovara stood looking at the station through the viewport. Beside her was a human, one of the few allowed to live on the Kothar homeworld. His name was Tae-min, and he served as a cultural ambassador. He had lived among the Kothar for 10 years, learning their language, their customs, their way of seeing the world. He was nervous now, knowing what this situation could mean for his people. What do you think happened? Tae-min asked quietly. Kovara didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the station. I think 3 cubs were alone and scared. I think someone helped them. Everything else is noise. The director claims manipulation. Mind control maybe, some kind of chemical influence. The director is a fool. Kovara said simply. Kothar cubs cannot be controlled. Their minds are their own until they reach adulthood. It is our way. Our biology. Anyone who knows our species would know this. But the Coalition Council doesn't care about biology. They care about politics. Kovara finally turned to look at him. Her yellow eyes, so much like the cubs, studied his face. Do humans often help those who cannot help themselves? Taemin thought about it. Some do. Many don't, but some do. It's not common, but it's not rare either. Then perhaps this human is one of the good ones. Good isn't enough in politics, Taemin said sadly. No, Kovara agreed. But it should be. The ship docked at the station. Kovara walked through the corridors with her honor guard behind her. Station personnel moved out of her way quickly. A Kothar elder was not someone to delay or disrespect. Director Velshara met her at the entrance to Base 7. She tried to explain the situation, to give her version of events. Kovara listened to 3 sentences, then held up one massive paw. Open the bay. Elder Matriarch, I must advise caution. The human may be dangerous. He may have weapons, or open the bay or I will remove the door myself. Velshara's face showed anger, but she signaled to her team. The bay doors opened slowly. Security demanded an answer for why the cubs stood with the human. The cubs gave nothing. Part 4, the bay doors opened, and Kovara stepped inside alone. Her honor guard waited outside, as did Velshara and her security team. This moment belonged only to the elder, the human, and the cubs. Dae-sung struggled to stand. 7 days without proper food had left him weak. His legs shook as he pushed himself up from the floor. The cubs stood with him, pressing against his legs to help support him. They looked at Kovara with wide eyes, their ears flat against their heads in respect. Kovara was massive. Standing upright, she was almost 8 feet tall, covered in thick gray fur marked with white scars. Her eyes were the same yellow as the cubs, but older, wiser, carrying decades of experience. She could have torn Dae-sung apart with one swipe of her claws. Instead, she stood very still and watched. She smelled the air. The bay smelled like humans, like cubs, like fear and hunger and time. But there was something else too. Something she hadn't expected. The cubs smelled content, comfortable. There was no scent of distress, no chemical markers of terror or pain. She watched how the cubs moved. Bomb stood in front, protective but not aggressive. Haru leaned against Dae-sung's right leg, helping him stay upright. Nari pressed against his left side, making small worried sounds. They were taking care of him, she realized. Not the other way around. Not anymore. Her eyes moved to the floor near Dae-sung's pack. She saw the shiny piece of metal Haru had brought him days ago, placed carefully like treasure. She saw where the cubs had groomed the floor clean around where they slept. She saw the empty food wrappers, rationed carefully, shared among all 4 of them. Then Kovara did something that made Velshara gasp through the security cameras. The elder matriarch sat down on the floor. She folded her legs beneath her massive body and settled onto the cold metal deck. It was a position of vulnerability, a position that said, I am no threat. I am here to listen. I am here to understand. Dae-sung hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back to sitting. His legs couldn't hold him any longer anyway. The cubs settled between them, forming a small bridge between the human and the elder. Kovara spoke in the Kothar language first. Her voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. The cubs' ears perked up. They responded with small chirps and whines, but they didn't move away from Dae-sung. Bomb looked at him, then at Kovara, then back at him, as if checking, as if asking permission. Then Kovara switched to Coalition Standard. Her accent was heavy, her words carefully chosen. You fed them. It wasn't a question, but Dae-sung answered anyway. Yes. You asked nothing in return. No. You stayed when you could have left. Yes. Why? Dae-sung was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the 3 cubs, then back at Kovara. Where I come from, we have a saying. A person who ignores a crying child is not a person. I don't know if that makes sense in your language. Kovara's eyes widened slightly. In the Kothar tongue, there was an old word, a word from ancient times before they had advanced technology or space travel. The word meant both person and one who answers cries. It was the same root. The same meaning. This human had somehow touched on something fundamental to her people without even knowing it. She stood up slowly. She walked to each cub and placed a massive paw on their heads one at a time. It was a blessing. A gesture that said, you are seen. You are valued. You are protected. The cubs pushed up into her touch, making pleased sounds. Then she turned to Daesung. She reached out one paw, claws carefully retracted, and touched his shoulder. It was gentle, almost tender. You will come to the homeworld. The cubs have chosen their pack. We honor their choice. Outside the bay, Velshara watched on the security monitors and felt her carefully built case crumbling. She activated her communicator. Elder Matriarch, I must object. Coalition law requires. Kovara's voice came through the bay speakers loud and final. The cubs are Kothar citizens. I am their legal guardian now. This falls under Kothar sovereignty, not coalition law. We are leaving this station. Do not interfere. Velshara felt rage building in her chest. This couldn't happen. She couldn't let the humans simply walk away. She couldn't be wrong. She called up her security team and moved to block the bay exit. When Kovara emerged with Daesung and the cubs, Velshara stood in their path. I am invoking Coalition Regulation 47, Section 12, Velshara said formally. Suspected trafficking of protected species juveniles. The human must face trial. The cubs are protected under Kothar law, Kovara replied calmly. Your regulation does not apply. Coalition law supersedes individual species law in cases of interspecies crime. There is no crime. The cubs were abandoned. The human helped them. That is all. The cubs refused to testify. That is evidence of manipulation. The cubs do not testify because they see no crime. They were asked the wrong questions. The two of them faced each other in the corridor. Security guards stood with weapons ready. Kovara's honor guard moved forward, their own weapons at hand. The cubs pressed against Daesung's legs, growling softly. The standoff could have turned violent. It could have become an incident that sparked conflict between two coalition species. But then another voice echoed through the corridor. Stand down, Director Velshara. That's an order. Everyone turned. Captain Yuna stood at the far end of the corridor with her tactical team. She had arrived for the extraction, but the situation had changed. She walked forward slowly, her hands visible and empty. Captain, Velshara said, you have no authority on this station. Actually, I do. Yuna held up a datapad. This is an emergency injunction from Coalition Central Command, signed by Councillor Ji-hoon and endorsed by 3 other council members. The case against the human designated Daesung is suspended pending full review. He is released into Kothar custody. Velshara's face showed pure fury. This is a mistake. This human is dangerous. He has done something to those cubs and you're letting him walk away. Yuna looked at Daesung, thin and weak but still standing. She looked at the cubs pressed against him, protective and calm. She looked at Elder Kovara, massive and powerful but treating the human with respect. I've known Daesung for 8 years, Yuna said quietly. He doesn't lie. He doesn't cheat. He doesn't manipulate. If he fed some hungry cubs, that's exactly what happened. Nothing more. She walked to Daesung and handed him a nutrient pack from her belt. You look terrible. Eat something. Daesung took the pack with shaking hands. Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me. Just don't make humanity look bad, okay? We've got enough problems without you starting an interspecies incident. She smiled slightly. He smiled back. Kovara gestured toward the docking bay. Come, my ship is ready. You need food, rest, and medical attention. The cubs need proper care. We will provide. The group moved through the corridor. Velshara and her security team stepped aside, but the director's eyes followed Daesung with cold hatred. She wasn't done. She would file reports. She would make appeals. She would do everything in her power to prove she was right. But for now, she had to let them go. As they walked, Nari looked back at Velshara. The smallest cub, the one who had been most scared 7 days ago, stared at the director with bright yellow eyes. Then Nari did something unexpected. She bared her tiny fangs in a small snarl, a gesture of defiance, a gesture that said, "You tried to take him from us. We will remember." Then she turned and pressed closer to Daesung's leg, following him toward the ship. On the bridge of Kovara's vessel, Taemin helped Daesung to a medical station. The cubs climbed up on the exam table with him, refusing to be separated even for treatment. The ship's doctor, a Kothar named Hee-jin, worked around them with patient amusement. They really won't leave him, she said in accented standard. Would you leave your pack? Kovara asked from the captain's chair. Hee-jin smiled. No, I suppose I wouldn't. The ship pulled away from Station Kepler 442 and turned toward the Kothar homeworld. In the cargo bay where it had all started, maintenance crews came in to clean. They found marks on the floor where 4 bodies had slept together. They found the shiny piece of metal still sitting beside a pack. They found empty food wrappers carefully folded. One of the crew members, a young woman, picked up the piece of metal and looked at it. "Someone left this," she said. Her supervisor shrugged. "Trash, throw it out." But the young woman didn't. Something about it felt important. She pocketed the metal piece and continued cleaning. Years later, when the story of the human and the cubs became famous, she would take that piece of metal out and remember. She would remember that sometimes the smallest things matter most. When security demanded an answer for why the cubs stood with the human, the cubs gave nothing. Part 5, the Kothar homeworld was beautiful. From space, it looked green and blue, covered with vast forests and mountain ranges. Dae-sung watched it grow larger through the viewport of Kovara's ship, and for the first time in 7 days he felt something like peace. The cubs were everywhere around him. Bomb lay across his feet as always. Haru explored the bridge, sniffing at controls and instruments. Nari sat in his lap, purring softly. The ship's doctor had examined all of them and declared everyone healthy, just hungry and tired. 3 days of proper food and rest had helped Dae-sung regain his strength. The cubs had grown rounder, their fur shinier. The ship landed near a settlement built into the side of a mountain. Buildings made of stone and wood blended into the landscape. Kothar walked through the streets below, some on 2 legs, some on 4. Cubs played in open spaces supervised by adults. It looked peaceful, natural, home. Kovara stood beside Dae-sung at the viewport. "My people are curious about you. A human living here is unusual. Be prepared for attention." "I'm not staying permanently," Dae-sung said. "Just until the cubs are settled. Then I'll go back to cargo hauling." Kovara was quiet for a moment. "The cubs may not settle without you. They will. Once they're with their own kind, they'll forget about me." "You do not understand pack bonds," Kovara said gently. "Once formed, they do not break easily." Over the next weeks, Dae-sung lived in a small dwelling at the edge of the settlement. The cubs stayed with him, of course. They explored their new home together, walking through forests, climbing on rocks. The cubs grew stronger every day. Bomb's protective instincts sharpened. Haru's curiosity led them to new discoveries. Nari's confidence bloomed. The Kothar watched them constantly. Adults stood at a distance and observed. Cubs peered from behind trees. Everyone wanted to see the human that their young ones had chosen. Most were curious. Some were skeptical. A few were openly hostile. Elder Malkuth was one of the hostile ones. He came to Dae-sung's dwelling one morning with several other elders. His fur was silver with age, his eyes hard and cold. "The cubs have been home for 3 weeks," Malkuth said without greeting. "They should be integrating with their own kind. Instead, they stay with you. This is unnatural." Dae-sung stood in his doorway. The cubs pressed against his legs, watching the elders warily. "I'm not keeping them here. They can leave whenever they want. They are confused, traumatized. They have formed an incorrect attachment." Or, another elder suggested, "They have formed exactly the attachment they chose to form." "Impossible," Malkuth snapped. "Cubs do not form pack bonds with other species. It goes against our nature." "And yet it has happened," Kovara said, joining the group. She moved to stand beside Dae-sung. "The cubs are healthy, happy, thriving. What is the harm?" "The harm is that they are being kept from their heritage. From their people. From their proper place." Kovara's eyes narrowed. "You speak of proper place. Perhaps you should tell the cubs what their proper place is. See if they agree." Malkuth looked at the 3 cubs. They stared back at him with yellow eyes that showed no fear, no uncertainty. They knew where they wanted to be. And it was right here. "This cannot stand," Malkuth said finally. "I invoke the trial of understanding. The human must prove his worthiness to remain with our cubs. If he fails, they will be removed from his influence and rehabilitated." The other elders murmured. The trial was ancient, used when someone's place in the community was questioned. Kovara looked concerned, but she couldn't argue. The trial was Malkuth's right to invoke. "What does the trial involve?" Dae-sung asked. "You will enter the deep forest alone," Malkuth explained with barely concealed satisfaction. "You will survive for 7 days without help. You will find food and shelter using only your own skills. If you return alive, your bond with the cubs will be recognized. If you fail, He didn't need to finish. The deep forest was dangerous. Many Kothar died there during their coming-of-age trials. A human would have even less chance, I accept, Daesung said. The cubs made distressed sounds. Bom pushed against his leg urgently. Haru whined. Nari grabbed his pants with her teeth, trying to hold him back. But Daesung knelt down and touched each of them gently. I'll come back, he promised. 7 days. Wait for me. They didn't understand all the words, but they understood the tone. They understood he was leaving. And they didn't like it. The next morning, Daesung entered the deep forest. He carried only a blade and water as the trial required. The trees were massive, blocking out most of the sunlight. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness. Things moved in the shadows, watching him. He walked carefully, conserving energy. He found berries he recognized from a survival manual he'd read years ago. He caught fish in a stream using a trap made from branches. He built a shelter against a fallen tree and covered it with leaves. The first 2 days were manageable. Difficult but manageable. The third day brought rain, cold and heavy. His shelter leaked. His clothes were soaked. He shivered through the night, unable to sleep. On the third night, he heard something following him. Footsteps. Breathing. Something large moving through the trees. He climbed a tree, his hands numb from cold, and waited. The creature appeared below. It was huge, twice the size of an adult Kothar, with long claws and teeth designed for killing. A Veshikor, Daesung remembered from his briefings, an apex predator that hunted Kothar cubs. It circled his tree, sniffing the air. It knew he was there. Then it started to climb. Daesung pulled out his blade, knowing it wouldn't be enough. The Veshikor was too big, too strong. He was going to die in this tree, and the cubs would wait for him forever. But then 3 small shapes burst from the underbrush below. Bom, Haru, and Nari. They had followed him. They had tracked him through 3 days of forest. They had come. The cubs attacked the Veshikor with ferocious courage. Bom went for the legs, biting and dodging. Haru distracted it with quick movements. Nari made alarm calls that echoed through the forest. They were small, but they were fast and coordinated. Daesung dropped from the tree and joined them. His blade found openings between the creature's armor plates. The cubs drove it back, working as a team. They had practiced this somehow, instinctively, knowing how to fight together. The Veshikor retreated, wounded and confused. It disappeared into the darkness. The forest became quiet again. Daesung knelt in the mud, breathing hard. The cubs pressed against him, checking him for injuries. They were all there. They were all alive. Together. They stayed together for the remaining 4 days. The cubs showed him which plants were safe to eat. They led him to clean water. They kept watch while he slept. When he returned to the settlement on the 7th day, he wasn't alone. The Kothar were waiting. Hundreds of them, gathered to see if the human had survived. Elder Malketh stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Kovara walked forward. You were supposed to complete the trial alone. I tried, Daesung said honestly. They followed me. Did you call them? No. Did you lead them? No, they found me on their own. Malketh stepped forward. He looked at the cubs, covered in mud and scratches from the forest. He looked at Daesung, exhausted but alive. He looked at how they stood together, the way they moved as one unit. The trial required you to survive alone, Malketh said slowly. You did not survive alone? No, Daesung agreed. But the cubs did something our traditions never accounted for. They chose to join you. They risked their lives for you. He was quiet for a long moment. Pack bonds are sacred. Choice is sacred. The cubs have chosen, and they have proven their choice through action. He lowered his head in a bow. The gesture shocked everyone. An elder never bowed to an outsider. I was wrong, Malketh said. This is not manipulation. This is not confusion. This is pack. True pack, Kovara smiled. Then we recognize the bond. The human stays. The cubs stay. They are pack recognized under Kothar law. The gathered Kothar made sounds of approval. Not all of them. Some still looked skeptical, but most understood. The cubs had spoken through their actions. That was the Kothar way. Years passed. Daesung never left the homeworld. He became a cultural liaison, working with Ambassador Taemin to help other species understand the Kothar. The cubs grew into adults, massive and strong, but they never left him either. A young Kothar scholar named Sunyi came to interview him for the historical archives. She was curious about the famous story. She asked the question that everyone wanted to know. Why did they stand with you? What did you give them? Daesung was older now, his hair gray. Bom lay beside him, fully grown, scarred from hunts and battles. Haru tended a garden outside. Nari patrolled the area, ever watchful. I didn't give them anything, he said. They were hungry, alone, scared. I sat with them. I shared my food. That's all. But they risked everything for you. No, Daesung said gently. We risked everything for each other. That's what pack means. That's what family means. Sunyi wrote this down carefully, but she still didn't fully understand. How could something so simple matter so much? Daesung saw her confusion. Security demanded answers. They wanted reasons, explanations, proof. But the Cubs knew something security didn't understand. Some things can't be explained. Some bonds just are enough. That will